Welcome back. You're listening to a panel discussion, Constituent Servicing and Federal Agencies, sponsored by Xerox on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. I'm your host, Jason Miller. Our panelists today are Gwen Costin, the Director of the Digital Services and Innovation Center in the Office of Citizen Services and Innovative Technologies at the General Services Administration, Amanda Wynn, the Director of Web Communications for the Department of Agriculture, and Ron Woody, a Senior Solutions Architect for Xerox Federal. Now, we kind of ended this on the idea of changing your processes. You can't just live on your old successes, right? You got to continue to move and change. Let me start with Ron. When you approach your agency customers, when you're looking at your commercial customers, how do you help them, or how do you work? What are you seeing about changing processes? Because it's that old culture. No one wants to change. Everyone likes what they've been doing.
Well, everybody likes what they've been doing, and I think again they have to realize what information are they giving out? Is it just a status check? As Gwen mentioned earlier, you can go to the IVR, the Interactive Voice Response System, for real quick information. But if you're choosing a prescription drug plan, if you're trying to get a patent through, it's a little different process. You still need to, you can tighten up the methodologies and the communication methods, but you can't choose a prescription drug plan in 140 characters. So, I mean, there's still that need for the traditional. One of the things, good or bad, what you think about the healthcare initiative, so many people at the lower end of the economic scale needed health insurance. Well, what they had to have before they could even do that was an email address. So some of them coming in to try, so we can keep talking about, but we need to realize what is the information we're trying to give, who are we trying to reach, and then those are the questions you ask, and then how to do it more efficiently and better.
And basically what you're saying is, before you say, you may look at your customer service approach and say, we're doing a pretty good job. We get high ratings. People seem to, it's very similar to what Amanda was saying, where we can see where people are coming to us and how long they're staying on the websites. But even when you do that, you still then have to step back and ask these broad questions.
And are you using the data? Because we all know in the communication methods, there's more data than you could ever realize. But are you using that to predict where's it headed? Where are you going? Are you seeing problems now that you need to start addressing before it becomes an issue? And I think that's where predictive analytics and some of the audits that are done, whether third party or internal, help with improving the constituent care.
I definitely want to go down that path of predictive analytics, but let me turn to Amanda real quick. You guys are modernizing some of your outreach efforts, your customer service efforts. Talk a little bit about the Farmers Market Initiative.
Yeah, so this is one that we're really proud of because it connects a lot of people with their food producers, and also helps them understand kind of that local economy, which is great. Several years ago, we used to survey farmers market operators and managers by paper, which a lot of groups still do, I'm sure, but we kind of took this online, if you will. And it was all by word of mouth. So we knew where most of these are. But for new markets, or if there's a new vendor who may not be in the directory, so when people go to look for it, they don't know, I can get duck eggs as well as, cauliflower and good stuff like that. So what we did was, over a few years, the Agriculture Marketing Service really modernized not only the process of collecting this information, but how it's delivered to the public. Social media has helped tremendously in this space. People are interested in farmers markets. I mean, in the DC area and nationwide, this is really kind of the hub of community on the weekends that even goes so much deeper. But people would see our surveys that we were promoting online and say, is your market provider in the directory? So suddenly we had these people asking their local produce guy or meat monger at the market, hey, are you in this directory? And then we would get more responses. This past year, the directory is now available as an API, which is really exciting because the value of our service is not just on its own, but it's when paired with and tripled with and just mashed together with all of these other resources that suddenly make it a more useful tool and kind of part of people's community and their daily lives. So that's one very real example that people may not think about USDA, but it's really supporting local business.
One of the things I really love the most about this example is that when you're looking at farmers markets, it's really feeding into this bigger piece of what's happening in people's lives. locally sourced, that hipster kind of culture, things that are close to home, more natural, so you could make your kale flakes, or you could get, who would have thought the beets would get so popular?
And kale flakes, who'd think that would be popular? Really? Kale.
Locally sourced, though,
not that
is
I
a
even
movement.
think it's kale.
And so part of it is that's brilliant about this is that USDA, from the government standpoint, can then actually feed into what's already happening and then provide a service that wasn't of value before, but is actually feeding in to this model. And then by using APIs and making it all open, it really just drives it forward.
And it even gives us entry to have a broader discussion. So people who had never thought about farming, now that we got their attention with farmers markets, we can talk about food hubs and how big of an impact these have on larger communities for the more regional aspects and really sourcing schools and other community facilities. And then you can talk about kind of beginning farmers and ranchers. So it kind of tracks back. So once you get people with the farmers market, suddenly they think, oh, well, where does my food come from? And you can kind of trace it back and have those conversations.
And in many ways, when you talk about putting this information out as an API, it's following the administration's goal of open data in the sense that, okay, well, let's see what people can do with it. The first thing when you talked about API, the thing I could think of was Yelp for farmers markets. Mm-hmm. Oh, I like Gwen's duck eggs, but Ron's cauliflower is always rotten, so don't go to... And all of a sudden you're going, what did I just walk into? But people really, I mean, if you look at the popularity of some of those sites, are you seeing companies or individuals kind of creating apps based on that API?
We are, and it's really exciting because a lot of it is local, right? So people in the Pacific Northwest may have different needs than, we do here in the Mid-Atlantic. So it's completely personalized, and it is relevant to those users, which I think is the most important part here.
And Ron, doesn't that also then make the federal government kind of that reach, that impact that the federal government has when they can put out data, when they can make an API of it, that just expands it. But also, in many ways, people go, where'd you get that data? Oh, I got it from USDA's website. Oh, wow, I didn't think to go there. It's all part of that expectation.
Well, and again, it's all about information. And some companies like Zappos, for instance, they've encouraged their reps to tweet, and they have followers. Their customers follow them. Now, you have to have a trust level, and you have to have a trust factor in your employees that you can put that communication method in their hands. And that's one thing that, whether you're commercial, whether you're government, whatever the case may be, you have to make people aware of what does this mean when the information's immediate? What can actually happen? What's the positive? There's tons of positive, but we also need to be conscious of what can happen on the negative side. But it's unique, one of the things with safety issues. I think when you see in FEMA, when you see USDA with the National Forest Service, being able to track the forest fires and know which forests are closed, when you need to leave from your fishing trip to get out of there. I think that's the immediate information that's extremely valuable.
Amanda, one of the things that Ron brought up was the feedback, positive, negative. Do you guys have a policy about feedback? If someone writes back and says to you, hey, your website is awful, do you respond? Or, hey, the opposite, hey, this was great. I never realized how many farmers markets I had in my area. Do you have that feedback loop?
We do, and it's across many platforms. So we hear it on Twitter. A lot of our agencies have their channels. And the good thing about having this decentralized model is that it's not just me and my one social media person who are kind of keeping our eyes and ears open on these different social platforms. Is all of the agencies. And as we shift the culture and people become more aware of the value of these conversations, that suddenly we have all of these other agents, who can kind of keep their ears open and bring it into their own program. So it's not always us identifying them. But
do people share with you? Do you get, for instance, the secretary writes to you and goes, hey, someone really didn't like what we did. Can you respond to this? Or do you get that type of feedback, not just from the secretary, but anyone? It
absolutely happens. And also on our blog, we have a lot of comments, just like any platform. Some more constructive than others. But it's great to hear what people are thinking because that helps us be better communicators and better public servants. Likewise on Facebook and just all of the other platforms, you start to see a trend of what's important to people at this moment, and we can better tailor our outreach to not be tone deaf to what people actually want.
Gwen, let me turn to you on social media because I think Amanda brought up a couple of times. We see it on Twitter, we see it on Facebook. From your perspective, because GSA has been out in front on social media in so many ways, do you find that that's an echo chamber? Meaning if somebody hates something, then all of a sudden a lot of people hate something, and then are you really getting useful feedback? Or how do you measure the social media feedback versus feedback you get through other channels?
That's a really great question, Jason.
Thank you.
The challenge, and again, this is not just our challenge, it's a challenge for Zappos as well, is really trying to, it's more art than science at this point in terms of the evaluation of this information. There was a colleague of mine who said that every piece of criticism is a gift. And we really learn a lot, not just from the praise that we get, but from the gifts of criticism. And part of it is doing an analysis of understanding what that criticism is. As Amanda was saying, it's like, it is personal. It's coming from different places. And so sometimes what somebody's complaining about is not, or criticizing, is not necessarily what they're stated. It's really something else. So they're angry at the end of the process, but it was the beginning of the process that made them mad. And so it's really taking the time, again, to look at the processes and to understand where are those inflections and where is it that those challenges coming out. I think social media helps us out a lot, and not just looking at what people are saying about us, but what people are saying about everything. And so we always have to be outside of our own bubble. So it's not just about what's happening within government, but what's happening external to government too, because there are tons of lessons. And for the public and for our customers, they don't exist only in the time they interact with government. They exist all the times they don't interact with us. And so we really need to be aware of, what are trends going, how are people talking. Use of hashtags is a great example in terms of using Twitter. How do people expect for you to respond? And then I think the other challenge is really how to deal with criticism, whether it is an echo chamber. I mean, there are certainly times where people have access to grind, but even in those cases, there are things to learn.
Do you guys have a policy at GSA about responding to positive or negative comments through social media, or do you take it maybe offline and try to email them separately, or if there's a way to contact somebody?
There are policies, and GSA has been in the forefront of social media policies, but the application of policies are really, dependent upon what is the issue that's going on, what is the topic, as well as what the venue is.
Ron, let me turn to you. When you work with customers and they talk about social media, where does that fall into the need, the improvement around constituent services?
The issue is when it comes to constituent services as opposed into commercial world, is commercial, you can always do something about it. If you're that rep, you may have a policy where you can give them a free hamburger. You can do something like that. You can address it almost immediately. If you're a rep for Medicare and you're not going to pay that bill, you can't change the law. And I think as citizens, we don't always understand that, because I can go to McDonald's and complain. I can go to Pizza Hut and complain, and I get something. If I go to the government and complain, they can't do anything about it. So again, it's the difference in the two levels. But as we've been trained as citizens, as consumers, that if I yell and scream loud enough, then I get my way. But they can't change the law. And that's part of it's part of training, and it's what you have to do for your representatives, for the people sending out the information and things like that.
Amanda, do you agree with that? Can you not do anything if you're in government? You can be empathetical. You can say, okay, I understand you're frustrated. Or can sometimes you can help with a resolution somehow?
It certainly depends on the issue, as Gwen mentioned. I think a lot of times people just want to be heard and know that they're heard. So when we hear that feedback, whether it's positive, negative, or neutral, and when it is the right moment to kind of respond and give them an answer or get them to the person on the phone who can help resolve that home loan or whatever it is, that's an extremely important moment, because I think in many cases people aren't expecting to hear from us.
And I was going to say the same thing, that a lot of times when we get complaints at Federal News Radio, I write people back right away and say, thanks for the note, I didn't realize, and I've gotten more times than not where you think it's a really nasty email. Someone goes, oh, thanks for responding so quickly.
Yeah.
So you both are laughing. Go ahead.
Well, one of the things that I get to see in my role as director of Digital Service Innovation Centers, we get to work with agencies all across government and see the different examples. And I just want to give you a real quick one. Nobody wants to have to borrow money to go to college. But the federal, the financial aid people at the Department of Education have done a really fabulous job of using social media to have online chats, et cetera. And one of the things that they've found is, just as Amanda was saying, and as you were saying, Jason, is that just acknowledging me where people will retweet, it's like, oh my God, OMG, DOE retweeted me. And it's huge. And it's really because government is so faceless. So one of the things that we could give them is a face.
That's one thing that we've started doing at USDA when we have kind of Twitter chats or Google Plus Hangouts where it has been us, feds talking. And while we can certainly provide value and insight, technical expertise to participating in a program or kind of explaining what a new policy means, we've started to flip the script and we ask questions of users. So whether it's, an organization and we're talking about the Farm Bill, we want to hear from people what my Farm Bill means. We've said our word, but we actually want to hear the stories and allow that forum for conversation to happen. And I think that's really important too, kind of facilitating those conversations. Even, with budget situations and less travel, you can sometimes get around the table less often. So doing that in a virtual space.
Yeah, so we can't give them a hamburger, but we can give them a feeling of being heard and being effective.
Mm-hmm.
If I could get a hamburger from USDA, I'd rather eat one than if I get a hamburger from GSA. That's not your core competency in the least bit. Just saying. One thing that kind of occurred to me, Amanda, as you were talking about it, is what do you do? How do you deal with the fact, or have you seen? Maybe you haven't seen this, but when that you have a set of people who see you have a Google Hangout or a Twitter conversation, and you have a set of people who hate the Farm Bill or hate something that you're doing, that they all just don't gang up on you, and all of a sudden you're just hearing the same thing from 10 people or 100 people that say, we hate this, and you're going, oh, maybe we should hate this. It's very similar to what regulations.gov saw, where you saw people all of a sudden sending in this form letter, 1,000 form letters that all said, we hate this regulation or whatever. Have you seen that, or people that haven't gotten there yet?
We have seen it, but not often. And what's really interesting is when the community kind of self-regulates, right? So you have the people who are very passionate about agriculture or nutrition or whatever the issue is, and they talk to the other side and say, hey guys, listen, this is important to us. Or, they start to have their own dialogue. So we don't have to necessarily get in the middle of it. Because we have such a broad mission, we have a lot of different conversations. So I think that's expected to have some of that.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. We come back. We have some more to talk about, including predictive analytics. You're listening to the panel discussion, Constituent Servicing and Federal Agencies, brought to you by Xerox on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.